We're going to get started in just a few minutes to let everyone sign on. Maybe there's a fun banter we can have, Nico, Sean, and Andy, before everyone joins.
Got your dad jokes ready?
I'm just excited I got to wear my mParticle sweatshirt today. It's finally cold enough in Texas. Maybe we can go around the horn. Nico, you're based out of New York, right?
Yep, I'm in New York City and Chelsea.
Nice. What about you, Andy?
Yeah, I'm actually based out of New York too, over in Brooklyn, but I'm from Texas originally, so I know how late it usually goes before it gets cold down there.
Nice. Where in Texas?
I'm from Houston originally, but I spent a lot of time in Austin because I went to school there. So you're in Austin, right, Shafiq?
No, I'm in Houston, but I went to UT.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. What about you, Sean?
I'm based in Brooklyn. That's where I am most of the time, although right now I'm up in Vermont, Burlington, Vermont, where I spend some time. But I too am a New Yorker.
Very, very nice. So I'm completely outflanked by the Northeast. Very cool. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started. Today, we're very excited to bring you our topic on data quality, realizing the full benefit of customer data with our data planning tools and templates. Today, we have Nico Stahl, who is one of our product managers, Andy Wong, who is a solution architect from our professional services team, and we have Sean Ryan, who's a technical writer on our content team. And I am Shafiq Shivji, and I'm joining you from our product marketing team. Just a couple of house rules, less rules, but more just point of information. Please post any questions you have in Zoom. I'll be monitoring them as they come up, and then we'll try to address them as throughout the webinar. So keep them coming. Let's make this interactive. We're taking a very conversational style approach. Think of it business cash. And so please do chime in. This webinar will be recorded, so you can share it or rewatch it after the event. All right. Well, I'm going to stop sharing the intro slide so you can see our faces a little bit better. And with that, let me pick on Nico first. He led the data planning launch that we just had. And I'm sure he knows a little bit about data quality, I hope. And so let's start with the softball. Why should companies care about data quality?
Yeah, hi everyone, welcome. So why should companies care about data quality? The main reason is that bad data quality can be really wasteful and expensive for companies. So it starts with the fact that if you're collecting data and you're storing data, then you don't really trust it because the quality's off. You can't really use it. You can't really use it to inform business decisions or to build good models or to activate marketing campaigns based off it. So you've done all this work to collect data and to instrument it, but now it's not really driving value for you. Another source of waste that we've heard from a bunch of customers is that cleaning up data is really expensive. Like once you've collected the data and you've forwarded it to downstream systems, like say a data warehouse, going into that data warehouse and actually cleaning the data once it's at rest is a big project. Typically involves a couple engineering teams, and it's just an expensive thing for a company to undertake. And then one third reason that we've heard is, compliance and privacy. So when you're collecting customer data, you have to be really, deliberate about the type of data you collect and how you store it, so that you're compliant with privacy regulation that applies to your business. And without a kind of proactive stance on managing data quality, you can open yourself up to risk in that regard.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's a very important topic of discussion for companies, but yet I hear a lot that it's just very difficult to do. You know, I talk to data engineers and they're just like, oh my God, 70% of my job is just cleaning stuff. What are some things that make it hard to do?
Yeah, so there are a couple things. I think one is that there's kind of this sequence of translation problems when it comes to instrumenting and collecting data. Like you typically are starting with, kind of the business objectives of what you're trying to achieve. And then you're kind of mapping that to, okay, like what do we actually have to do in terms of collecting data? What should the data look like? What attributes should it have? What schema should it have? And then you're doing another translation to, okay, what is the actual code that now instruments that data that I want to collect? And at each of those steps, information can get lost. So that's one core, source of making this hard. What makes it even tougher is that there are typically a bunch of different people involved in that process. So the business objectives are coming from one group, and then kind of figuring out the project and the program is coming from another group, and then writing the code is another group. And so you get this game of telephone where you're kind of translating from like objective to code. And as that's happening, information is lost, and some things are lost, and that can just lead to aberrations in your data that can lead to quality problems.
Got it. So like you said, it's the game of telephone, and we all know, we've all played that game,
Yeah.
and know that you never, whatever comes in and starts off that process, it's never what ends up being at the end.
Yeah.
So, it makes sense. So, data quality is a big thing. There are some big boulders in the way, but how does, we're talking about data planning in this webinar. How do we tie these two together? How does the data planning help with the data quality?
Yeah, sure. So, the data plan becomes like a really core artifact in this whole process, because it becomes the source of truth for the data that you're collecting. And what I mean by that is like it becomes essentially the blueprint for the events you're collecting, when you're collecting them, and what kind of attributes they contain, and what those attributes mean. And now once you have that source of truth, the cool thing about this data plan is it's not just like a piece of paper or like a spread, like just a spreadsheet. Like it actually maps to a structured like file format. And that structured format can then be mapped into whatever interface you want for a given team, right? So once you have this data plan, you can like take it into a tool that generates code, or you can take it into Confluence and like create a really nicely like edited Confluence page that has all the information, or you can take it into a spreadsheet, or you can take it into mParticle, and in mParticle then like actually validate the data that's coming in through your source systems against those expectations you set in the plan. So the plan really becomes living documentation of what you want to collect. And mParticle gives you a mechanism to really validate actual incoming data against those expectations, so that you don't, miscollect anything or collect the wrong thing or ingest anything you don't want to ingest.
Got it. So let's switch gears here. I want to bring Andy into the conversation, because he's worked as a solution architect with many customers. And my understanding is that data planning is, part of the process. It's a very intricate or a foundational step, if you will, in the process. Nico went into the details of why it's important in terms of the actual the things you can do with data planning. But can you walk us through the process and help us understand what a customer goes through and things they need to consider?
Yeah, definitely. Happy to walk you guys through that. So like you said, data planning is a really foundational part of the process when you implement a CDP. You can think of it similar to like a requirements gathering phase of a large project. And really what it is a lot of defining what the data requirements are, and then using that definition to guide your implementation, and then also validate and govern the data quality of what you're collecting, right? And really, whenever I walk customers through it, I really stress the importance of it being a really cross-functional effort across the entire organization, right? It should involve basically every team that's either going to touch the customer data or have some type of impact on that customer data. So it shouldn't just involve only the marketing team or only the product team. It really should be every single stakeholder that has really any use of customer data, or even people like on the compliance and privacy side that need to weigh in on what can and can't be done with that data. All those voices really need to be heard in that process. So that's the number one thing that I always stress when I have customers going through that data planning process. And yeah, I think another thing that's pretty important is really getting like both a top down and bottom up view of your data. Like Nico said before, it's really important for the data planning requirements to be driven by like the high level business goals and KPIs of your company, and then analyzing what data you need to kind of power those goals. But then at the same time, going bottom up and getting really granular with your data sources to see, okay, what are all the data points that are available, right? What are all the actions my customer can take? What are all the properties that might describe my user? And that'll help you really future-proof your data plan, because the last thing you want is to think of a new use case a month down the line, 2 months down the line, and not have the data collection in place to support that, right? So you want to be pretty robust initially with your data plans. And then, you know, if you don't have the resources to implement it all in one shot, you can go in and you can decide, okay, these data points are a phase 1 priority versus a phase 2 versus a phase 3. And the last thing I'll say is, like, once you've defined what you're going to collect, really the next level on top of that is starting to define the validation criteria, right? That's how you really start to keep an eye on your data quality. It's not just defining what's collected, but how that data should appear when it is collected, because of that game of telephone, like we talked about. Is you really want to start to put some guardrails in around what values you expect to receive for different data points, so that you don't have bugs in the code that make your data unusable downstream.
So I get it. We have the scaffolding of saying, hey, here are business objectives. This is what we need the data to do. Here's what we actually have. And let's tie those two together and figure out a plan to make sure that we can deliver on our goals with the data that we have. And if we have to phase it out, that's okay, but we have alignment in that regard. So the scaffolding makes sense to me. What are some of the best practices that you've learned from working with customers, trying to achieve that?
Yeah, there's a lot that I could get into. But I would say one of the main things that I always stress, and like I was saying before, is that it really should be a very collaborative activity and exercise for your company. And to that end, like, we actually have created, let me share my screen really quickly. We've created a Google Sheet tool that helps our customers collaborate internally within their organization, because everyone can access the Google Sheet, put comments, make updates before you really lock in that specification. And so this has been a really helpful tool that a lot of our customers use when they're starting to create that data collection specification from the ground up. So that's number one. I would say another thing is really understanding how to structure your data so that you don't just kind of end up with a huge volume of kind of unusable data, or data that's really hard to parse through. One of the things that I see customers do a lot is they get very specific with their event names. So you'll see an example here. We've got a screen view called product detail. A lot of times I'll see customers actually put the name of the product in the event name itself. So if you're selling candy or something, it'll be like, M&M holiday product detail. And that just results in you having, dozens or hundreds of unique event names that when you're doing your reporting, it's very hard to parse through. So what we always recommend is abstracting some of that detailed information out and capturing it instead as what we call event attributes, right? Create a more generic event name that says really just product detail, because really those screens are all the same. You're just showing different products, and then capturing those details in the attributes themselves. So abstraction, I think, is one of the big kind of best practices that we always see. And
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It's not something people think about right off the bat because they think it's really easy. Let's just grab the name of the screen, and that's going to be the screen view name. But if you kind of take that approach and you don't give it thought early on, you can really end up with really hard to use data downstream. Kind of an extension of that is this shared events attributes structure that we've built, where you can actually start to define common attributes that will be repeated across a lot of your events. So you'll see an example here. We've got 3 attributes, a link URL, link location, link CTA. All of those will be captured on basically every navigation event that the user performs, right? No matter what they're clicking on, it's always going to have to capture these three. So instead of going into your event specification and having to update those three attributes every single time for every single event, you can capture them centrally here in the shared event attributes tab. And then whenever you want to add or remove or modify these common event attributes, you can do it in one place and have that apply to basically all the events that are related.
Okay, that's a game changer because you're not sitting here and having to basically repeat and repeat and rinse every event just because they have the same attributes. So I can see that saving a lot of time.
Yeah, it definitely saves our customers a lot of time. It just makes things much more organized and easy to manage. And I think the last thing I'll say with best practices is, I don't want to focus too much on the events. I think it's important to also talk about, user data on your users, because really at the end of the day, every data point that you capture, it needs to be tied back to an individual user, right? So I think one of the main things that I always tell customers is to really understand the difference between a user identity and a user attribute. Right? A lot of times there's confusion about how certain data points should be captured. And I think the main distinction is that user identities should be a value that's able to uniquely identify who the user is. So things like first name and last name, even though they do describe the user, they're not really something you can use to uniquely identify them. So they're always better captured as a user attribute. Whereas a user identity would be something like their email address they use to sign in, or like a unique customer ID that's generated for them on the back end when they register.
Yeah, because you don't want to resolve an ID on someone named John, right?
Yeah, you're going to end up with a lot of John Smiths. Yeah, and the last thing I'll say there is that there are some user identities that you may also want to set as a user attribute. If you're familiar with just marketing tech software in general, a lot of times they don't have just an unlimited number of user identities that they'll accept. Usually there's one or two, maybe an email, maybe a unique user ID. And you may have a lower tier identifier like a subscription ID or like a loyalty ID that may not be the primary, but you still want it to be passed downstream to your analytics and reporting tools. And in those instances, it's actually good to capture that as a user attribute too, because user attributes, just in terms of the data model of most tools, are much more flexible.
Got it. Hey, Andy, let me interrupt you a little bit because we have a question from the audience. The question is, who should be involved in data planning and how should we structure this meeting or a meeting, sorry?
Yeah, well, like I said before, like really any team that has any input on that data collection that's going to be using customer data should be involved in data planning. You obviously want to focus on getting the requirements of your data consumers and really understanding those thoroughly. So like I said, it's like the marketing teams, the product teams, engineering teams, people that will be looking at that data, but then also involving your privacy teams and compliance to understand what regulations you need to abide by as you're processing that customer data and passing it between various systems. So really, you want to bring a lot of people to the table. But, in my experience, I know that can become pretty messy. You've got a lot of voices and they're all kind of competing to get their voice heard in terms of like getting their requirements out there. So, when it comes to structuring those conversations, I've always found my most successful customers, they actually create kind of like a central owner of the data collection framework. And that centralized owner would be responsible for kind of collecting all the requirements from the various teams, understanding where the overlaps are, where the conflicts are, and working to resolve those conflicts. Because if you don't have that central owner, then you've kind of got a big table of a lot of voices, and there's not any one function that's able to really pull it all together for a unified data collection.
Andy, that's super interesting. And I'm curious what kind of roles those like job titles those owners typically have.
Yeah, I'll be honest, it's a pretty new function that we've seen come up, especially with our larger customers. A lot of times they stand up like a separate data collection team that may not have existed before. What I've seen is they'll usually pull from like a systems architect type role, someone that's familiar with kind of the data flows. Maybe they weren't getting their hands dirty with the in the weeds data activation, like they're not super familiar with the CRM tools or the analytics tools themselves, but they have awareness of what the architecture across the data stack looks like. I've seen those individuals usually be the most effective at those kind of central data collection roles.
That's interesting. So let's switch gears a little bit. So we've talked about why data quality is important, why planning is an important step. We've demonstrated like a tool here, the spreadsheet. But then what happens next, right? We've had the meeting, we've aligned everybody, we know our data, what we need. Now what do you do?
Yeah, so actually this is a great tool that Nico and team created. Once you create this specification and you've gotten all the inputs from your various teams and come to a final spec here in the data plan builder, there's a really quick script that runs. If you just hit mParticle generate data plan, it'll run this script. It'll take everything that you entered here in the spreadsheet and it'll spit out this machine readable JSON. And you can take this JSON and copy it and paste it directly into the mParticle UI and create in the mParticle platform what we call a data plan. And then that data plan is what you can actually activate and start using to enforce those validation rules against the data that's flowing into the platform. And it'll start to tell you this was according to plan or this is not according to plan. It'll start flagging those violations for you so you can go back and examine why that bad data is flowing into the system. So I think that's one of the big ones. And then of course, translating this into basically a development spec, right? Taking the requirements and handing that over to your engineering team to actually build the application or the website, putting the code on the page. And there's also a great tool here, our mParticle snippets builder, where that same JSON, if you copy it and you paste it into this snippets builder, let's say I want to build for a web application, I paste my data plan JSON in here, and it'll just really quickly spit out all the code snippets that I need to drop into my page to collect the various events. So you'll see, here's some e-commerce events up here. Here's some custom events down here, and even setting user attributes. All of it is captured and spit out in the language that you select.
That's really, really sweet.
Yeah.
Cool. So we have, I think we have a demo set up by Sean to actually bring all these concepts together. Sean, do you want to take the reins and take us on a little ride?
Sure thing. I will take the reins. So yeah, that's actually a perfect handoff for what I'm going to sort of dive into and talk about for a little while. So I think, if we can imagine like we're either the product manager or, an engineer at an e-commerce company, and we've kind of gone through this process that Andy's spoken to extensively, where we've assembled the team, we've used the data plan builder to map out exactly what we want to collect. And we've translated that into machine readable code, and we've implemented that across our, across a web property. And what I'm going to show you now is actually an example of, what that might look like in the real world. This is kind of just like a sample web interface for a furniture company that, like many e-commerce sites, is kind of built on templates that, are populated with like specific product data. And we've actually, to take like a little bit of a step back, our data plan builder has kind of several different industry specific templates, each of which kind of come pre-built with common events and, like a typical structure that suits use cases within that vertical. And we used the e-commerce plan builder to build our plan here. And as we're kind of going through this site, performing different user actions, clicking on different things, customizing products when we get to a product page, what you can see is we've actually created these pop-ups here to show you the event names and some of the attribute names that we're collecting and sending over to mParticle as we perform these actions. We have obviously just like regular customer events that are popping up when we're looking at different pages, viewing different products, and we have some user identities and attributes that are being collected as well as we do things like, accept and deny marketing consent and things like that. So this is kind of, practically what we're doing after we've implemented a data plan in this is a web example, but the same would be true for, for any mobile property that we implement data collection in. And as we're doing that, actually, that we're looking over here at the mParticle live stream, every time we collect new data and, we're firing these events, that's actually being sent over the wire into the live stream in real time. And if I can get this to actually be populated with data, there we go. This is showing you, all these events individually. And if you click into them, you can kind of inspect what you're able to, what you've collected. And this is a custom event, for example, when we performed our login. We have several different screen view events for products that give you product IDs and product names. And in addition to that, we have some custom events as well that we've kind of added throughout the sites. And in most cases, you can see that these events have, a green check mark, which indicates that they're valid. And what that means is that the data that's coming through lines up with what we've laid out in the data plan. All of the validations that we've set are correct. We're not getting any errors in terms of our the actual data that we're sending through as attributes, and it also indicates that they're not unplanned events, because that's another error that you would see in live stream if it occurred. We do have a couple examples here though of these red X's, and in this case, this is an example of an event that does not match the configuration that we've laid out in the data plan. So we can actually inspect that and look, closely at what went wrong and what's not being collected properly. And in this case, we see it's actually a typo. We're collecting the string 3-seater spelled with 2 E's when we're expecting 3-seater, obviously spelled correctly with an A. So with that information, it's actually really easy to go back into our code and to see where we've implemented this. And we can see right here, there is our typo. So, with that real-time feedback, we can go ahead and make the correction and just, validate right away that it's been fixed the way it needs to be. And indeed it has. We can see, an event with a green check mark coming through with the correct spelling of cedar.
That's awesome. That's really cool. So you can actually make changes on the fly and see the events come in properly. It's almost like the needle in the haystack, right? The needle has been given to you and saying, "Here, go take this needle and fix it." That's really amazing.
And I mean, that was a relatively trivial example, because that was a really obvious thing and an easy thing to fix. But, the live stream gives you this real-time visibility into your data and gives you the ability to make sure that what you're collecting matches what you're expecting. And all kinds of errors would pop up here. Actually, there are 2 main classes of them. One is, metadata errors, which include things like names mismatching, or if you have an attribute that you've specified as required, not included in an event that's coming through, that would be flagged as well. In addition to that, you have like just regular data errors, which would be things like, if you have a regex expectation that you've set as part of a validation for an attribute on an event that is not lining up properly, that would be flagged. And you'd get this, every time you have an error coming through, you have this event details box here that's giving you all the information that you would need really to go in and debug this, and kind of, it makes your job a lot easier. Essentially, you don't have to dig through a bunch of different tools. You don't have to kind of guess where this is coming from in your code, and it kind of really speeds up that that QA cycle that data engineers would have to ultimately be responsible for.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really cool here is like sometimes, like I like how they show the enumeration there in the error details, because it may not just always be an issue with the code. It may be that when you were creating the data plan originally, you put the validation criteria in, and maybe the code is right, and you just need to go into your data plan and update what's expected in those enumerated values.
Right. That's also true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is pretty awesome. Thank you for sharing that demo. We actually have a few questions from the audience. So, Sean, since I've got you on, let me plug this one. The Person says, I don't have any data plans yet. How do I get started?
Yeah, so as I kind of briefly mentioned before, our data plan builder has industry-specific templates that kind of are matched to the individual use cases that you might see in different verticals like media, QSR, gaming, e-commerce. We have a few others as well. So a really great way to get started with data planning if you're not doing it already is to use the data plan builder that it is specific for your industry, and kind of go through the exercise that Andy was kind of defining a little bit earlier, where you would align different data stakeholders to talk about the end result that they want to achieve, the use cases they want to to work towards with the data. And then from there, go about building a data plan with the template, which gives you a lot of really great safeguards in terms of kind of making sure that you're building in best practices when you're defining what data to collect and how to model it.
That's great. Yeah. So start with the industry templates and go from there. Here's another one I got for you, Sean. So one of our folks is a developer and asking, how can I use data plans in my workflow? So you've been able to show some debugging capabilities, but is there anything else?
Yeah. So we already kind of took a look at one of the ways that you can go about implementing data plans with the snippet SDK, right? I mean, that's actually a really easy and really great way to just generate the code that you're going to need to instrument event collection across. We looked at it in the context of a web application, but you can actually generate various code for like iOS and Android platforms as well, which are also language specific with the snippet SDK. So that's one workflow that you can adopt. We also have a data planning API, which actually, if you want to handle things a little bit more programmatically and incorporate data plan updates and implementation into kind of your existing software development lifecycle, you can use the data planning API, which gives you the ability to fetch data plans from your mParticle instance on the fly to make sure that you always have the most recent version of your data plan checked into source code. In addition to that, you can also, it gives you the ability to perform, create, read, update, and delete functions on data plans as well. So if you had a need to update a plan or even delete a plan, you can do that from source code without even having to go and do that within the UI. And then once you have a data plan checked in, to your project, we also have a tool called SmartType, which is an automatic code generation tool that is built on Kotlin multi-platform. And in many ways, it accomplishes the same thing that the snippet SDK does, although it goes, definitely a step further than that, in that it's, you can imagine you have your data plan checked in as a JSON file in your local project. You install SmartType, and then using the SmartType command to kind of initiate a config file, you tell it where to look for the data plan. And then you also can indicate, for which platforms and which languages you want libraries built for. At that point, you run a generate command, and it gives you a whole, library within the language that you're working with based on your data plan. And then from there, you can just, internally inside your project, make calls to the SmartType API, and then it will expose an autocomplete kind of linting feature that will actually just give you the ability to just scroll down within your, whatever IDE you're using's autocomplete feature to just like select the events that you want to call and forward to mParticle in whichever part of the UI that it makes sense to do that based on the user behavior you want to capture.
So it sounds like we've got quite a few developer tools available for the dev folks on the call. Nico, I'm going to address this next one to you because I think we just got lost in the shuffle. Where can I get the builder?
Yeah, good question. And it's actually published on our docs site. So if you go to docs and you go to guides and you go to data master, you'll see just text search, like browser search for templates. and you'll find the data plan builder templates. We have 6 different industry templates, and then we have like a generic one. That's just kind of a general example to get started with.
The next one, I'll ask Andy this one. How often should I be updating my plans? This seems more like a customer-centric one.
Yeah. Well, what I always tell customers is that, your data plan should really be like a living, breathing artifact that evolves with your product over time. Your customer touch points are always going to be changing, whether that's new features, new pages within your apps and websites, or new even offline collection with in-store, actions and behaviors that you can capture there. So really, anytime that there's a new feature that you roll out or a new screen that has potential data points that can be collected, your data plan should be updated to reflect that as well. And the other thing I'll say is, like Nico alluded to before, data quality issues are kind of just a fact of life when you're working in this space. So when you start to see data quality issues, like I was mentioning with Sean's demo, sometimes the data quality issues don't originate in the code. Sometimes you've defined the data plan incorrectly at the start. And when you start to see the data flow in and you start to see violations, you'll actually need to go back to the data plan and refine the definition of the validation criteria that you set out.
Got it. Nico, I'm curious to get your perspective on it as well.
Yeah, happy to. So we actually use data plans internally here at mParticle to manage our own data and our own data collection in our app. And one of the things we found really useful is to really tie it into our software development process. So anytime we have a new feature that we want to instrument, or we want to increase our analytics coverage on an existing feature, the first thing we do is like specify the new event or the new attributes in the data plan. And then when we create like a Jira ticket to actually track the work, we just link to the data plan. And we're like, please instrument this event. So it really serves well actually within like an ongoing agile development process as a way to add incrementally new features as you go.
I would say that might be a new best practice, is make it part of your development cycle. Very cool. All right, well, that's it for the questions. I would like to go around the horn, if you will, maybe Nico, picking on you again. Any concluding thoughts for our audience based on what we talked about? Any things that you want, what's the one thing you want folks to remember when they walk away?
I'd say that, data quality is, a really widespread issue, and it's something that you can now with these new tools, like really proactively take control of. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. If you're an existing customer, you know your channels. And if you're a new customer, excited to hear from you, and we'd love to work with you on improving your data quality. All
right, well, we have one more last question I want to throw in before we call it quits. So one of our audience says, any case studies you can point me to for healthcare and telecom? So I'm gonna throw this out to the panel and see if anybody wants to bite. Nico, I'm gonna pick on you actually.
So we don't at the moment. We do have experiences that we're pretty excited to share more if you'd like to reach out to us. But I don't think we have this is a relatively new product area. I don't think we have an actual website case study at this point. But would love to continue the discussion.
So why don't we do this? Yeah. We can reach out to that person after the webinar and follow up. Great. Any other thoughts? Or I think we can wrap this one. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for attending. This was great. Special thank you again to Nico, Andy, and Sean for being with us today. I hope you walk away with something new, learn something new, and stay tuned for all the new things that are coming down the pipe. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.